I want to talk to you today about an underappreciated policy approach to promoting health and empowerment for women in developing countries, and that's through sports. For 7 years, I was actually a member of the women's national soccer team of Ghana, affectionately nicknamed the Black Queens. So that's right, let me adjust my crown, because you're in the presence of royalty. And in fact, I was a little intimidated by the name Black Queens at first. Who wouldn't be? But then there's that old adage, if the shoe fits, and let's just say the cleats were my size. And I'll probably be milking the name Black Queens, at least with my husband, until that cow runs completely dry. But in all honesty, the name Black Queens is intended to pay homage to the bold black star, which anchors the center of the vibrant red, gold, and green stripes that together represent the spirit of a nation. In 1997, at the age of 15, I went to try out for the national soccer team of Ghana. And I should probably just pause and reflect on the metaphor there. I was born in the United States to an American mother and a Ghanaian father. And although I had traveled extensively and I spoke Tree fluently, I had never actually been to Ghana until the moment that I was literally called upon to justify my inclusion. And that's an entirely different TED Talk on identity politics by itself. There were a lot of challenges, but ultimately for me, this was a narrative of personal triumph, as I became the first foreign-born woman to represent Ghana, the youngest woman to play in the senior national team at the time, and eventually the first woman to graduate from the Ivy League and participate in the FIFA Women's World Cup. I usually say that my time with Ghana was the best and worst experience of my life. It seriously made me wonder if Charles Dickens was writing about the French Revolution or Ghana in the late 90s, because it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epic of belief, it was the epic of incredulity, it was the season of light, and when our generators were out, it was the season of darkness. Because it was both the best and worst experience of my life, it's probably the most formative experience of my life, with the experience of motherhood a respectively close second. The conditions weren't easy in Ghana, and very few people really appreciate the challenges faced by athletes in developing countries. When we watch international tournaments, it's hard for us to fathom what one set of athletes has actually had to go through just to be able to participate. We see athletes on the field, and there's a false assumption of a level playing field. But I've actually seen both sides. In America, soccer is an upper middle class sport. And I was able to play at the club and Olympic development levels because my parents had enough time and enough money to invest in my pursuits. A lot of resources go into women's soccer and women's sports generally, and there are several entitlements that come with being able to distinguish oneself enough to represent your country. But when I played for Ghana, the majority of the women hadn't accessed education beyond the primary level. Most of these women were actually playing soccer because they had learned in an unstructured way during free time that they had available to them because they weren't in school and because they had no other meaningful agendas for their lives. These women could be described as marginalized, subject to gender inequality and discriminatory traditional practices that basically inhibited decision-making and control. A few of them had spouses and children, but for most of them, the chance to play soccer was a significant incentive for just even being able to delay marriage and childbearing. And I admit that I often felt guilt as a member of the team because I knew that the other women in the team played soccer for money, to support themselves, to support their families, to support their extended families. Being in the soccer team was one of the most lucrative opportunities for these women to earn and control their own financial resources. So for me, being there to play only out of a passion for the sport seemed juvenile and maybe even disrespectful to the circumstances of the women that I challenged for a spot in the team. And I struggled with that. As professional athletes in Africa, we didn't always have electricity. We sometimes traveled through conflict zones to play games. My teammates and I battled malaria and other infectious diseases. In fact, one of my teammates lost her only young daughter while we were in the team to anemia, which is a condition that probably would have been controlled under other circumstances. And my heart broke for her because her child died, and she had little choice but to accept it and move on as quickly as possible to avoid jeopardizing her spot in the team, to avoid jeopardizing this only chance she had to make a way for herself. But despite all of this, we persevered. If I had the benefit of more time, I would tell you stories from my days in Ghana that would entertain and amaze you, that would perplex and baffle you, that would devastate and humble you. But today I've chosen stories to inspire you. And my primary goal for today, pun intended, is to make the case for sports as an underutilized vehicle for women's empowerment, using my own experiences as a participant observer to illustrate this argument. And these are the experiences that have motivated and guided my academic research in women's empowerment, striving to broaden the way we conceive empowerment, sources of empowerment, and processes of empowerment for women beyond just education and microfinance models. When we consider the potential of sports to empower women, I think we have 5 broad considerations to look at. First, female athletes leverage new identities. Second, female athletes may have more malleable gender characteristics. Third, female athletes may have a greater sense of authority over their own bodies. Fourth, female athletes learn the art of friendship, and it is an art, through participation in team sports. And finally, people who have otherwise shown little interest in women have shown a significant investment in the female athlete. So let's walk through these quickly. First, I've observed that the sport of soccer is pretty much synonymous with the concept of nation in Africa. It transcends ethnicity and other social distinctions like gender, and because of this, women can actually move from the margins to the center by leveraging their identities as athletes. In many global contexts, athlete or soccer player is a privileged identity. And for women in developing countries, it might be one of very few privileged identities that's actually accessible to them. The women who comprised the Black Queens were on the whole representative of the average African woman. Uneducated, not from any kind of privileged families or backgrounds, without access to formal employment opportunities, not necessarily endowed with any kind of distinctive beauty or regality. Yet as soccer players, we were queens. And because of the international nature of our tournaments, the whole world called us Black Queens. And probably most importantly, we called ourselves queens. Second, where masculinity and femininity can be described as performances, through sports, women can learn the skill set of another performance of gender that they can later call upon to protect themselves. And this is supported by research in North America and Europe that shows that women who play sports are less likely to be victims of domestic violence and are better able to negotiate condom use with their intimate partners. And these are tremendous gains for the average African woman. Women who play soccer learn to assert themselves. On the field, we learn to be aggressive. We learn to be defensive. We learn to be strategic. We learn to be communicative. Probably most importantly, because nobody expected much of us African girls compared to powerhouses like Julie Foudy's US team or Soon Wen's Chinese squad, We learn to believe in ourselves, even against all odds. And these are not skills that are easily accessible through socially constructed performances of femininity in Africa or elsewhere, for that matter. Third, when you train your body as an athlete, you go through a disciplined process where you become the sole proprietor of your body. You understand your body's potential and limits. You protect your body, you transform your body, you own your own body. This is also an important opportunity for African women. For example, I had a teammate who had long incisions on either side of her face that were cultural markings that she had received at birth. And even though she was very beautiful, she struggled to see herself as beautiful because of these scars that had been put on her face without her consent. But I observed that through playing sports, she went through a process where she took control of her physical person. And somehow through that process, she was made more whole. Fourth, team sports like soccer give the opportunity for friendships and solidarity, which is actually surprisingly rare for African women. Even when players were released and new players were brought into our camp, there was never a time when fewer than 4 languages were spoken. It was the Tower of Babel. There were even times when the coach and the player didn't speak the same language. But even with what seemed like an impossible limitation to overcome, we succeeded because our feet translated for us. And on the field, we spoke one language, soccer. And it was a language that bound us together towards a common goal in an experience that has forever linked us. We respected each other, we pushed each other, we worked through frustrations with one another, we built trust. And even though we had different faiths, we prayed together. Taken together, these are important revelations as we continue to improve the conditions of women in developing countries. Finally, even more unique than the fellowship of African women playing soccer is the level of respect that these otherwise marginalized, disrespected, or forgotten women receive. In fact, a soccer game is a rare opportunity where thousands of people are gathered together at a time to support, to honor, to revere the African soccer player, be they men or women. And quite frankly, it's actually very rare to have so many people wholly invested emotionally and financially in the African woman. But I've seen stadiums packed full of supporters, tens of thousands in Africa and on other continents. And even in Africa, where research tells us that people are living on less than $5 a day, some 90,000 people, and mostly men, paid to watch just one of our games. Yes. So taken together, these are important revelations as we continue to work to improve the conditions of women in developing countries. Given the disparity between the rich and the poor in our world today, and given the fact that the greatest burden of poverty actually rests on the shoulders of women, we have to challenge ourselves to develop and execute more creative and more innovative policy to close these gaps. The level of disparity demands nonlinear thinking. We have to ask ourselves again, what are the most effective and efficient ways to give women the skills they need to improve their own lives? And how can we motivate investment in women locally towards improving gender inequality? And today I'm asking if it could be through sports. I want to close with this. In her TED Talk on body language, Amy Cuddy explains that the universal human gesturing for power is standing with your arms raised and your chin up. It's a form of communication that transcends culture. It's an essential human gesturing. This is a photo that was taken at the 2002 African Women Cup of Nations tournament in Warri, Nigeria. And this is just moments after we had defeated the home team, the favored Super Falcons. Take a look at this photo and take a look at the postures of the people in it. First, take a look at the women in this photo who are standing with their arms raised and chins up, expressing a sense of power, a deep sense of power that was derived from transforming their intentions into a desired outcome. Second, take a look at the male supporters that are surrounding these women. They're also expressing a sense of power and joy in relation to our success. And many of these men are part of the coaching and training staff, and these are men who have been integral in creating the opportunities for our achievement. And even my dad is among them. Finally, take a look at this soldier down in front, and this was a soldier who was assigned to guard us during our stay in this tumultuous environment in Nigeria. And if you look at him and you look at his posture, you'll basically see the conclusion to my talk. This soldier is standing with his gun down and his arm raised, not in surrender, but in victory. And we, African women, had changed his posture on that day through soccer. A picture's worth 1,000 words, or maybe just 3. Women, sports, empowerment. Thank you.